let's talk about Operation Pop Smoke. And before, I really want to get your opinion on this, because as somebody who's dealt with PTSD, I mean, when I came back from my tour in Iraq, I lost one of my best friends over there, and went through a pretty dark depression. And the only reason I think I'm here today is because somebody knew how to reach me in that hole that I was in and pull me out. I didn't pull myself out. Somebody else, and we were talking before we went live about the mindset of somebody who deals with trauma and how the logic, conscious part of your brain kind of turns off in that way. But, obviously PTSD has a lot to do with the trauma side, but a lot of suicides, especially in the veteran community, I think are attributed more to they lived their whole life in the military with a mission. And then they decide they don't want to do that anymore, and their brothers and sisters carry on, and they're left having just gotten off that train, and they don't know what to do. They're lost. They're feeling like they don't have a mission anymore, and their life is pointless. And they get into that dark, deep depression that brings them there. What do you think is the bigger piece? Do you think it's the physical act of going through the trauma? Like, what's really contributing to the action that's being taken that's giving us the terrible statistics that we see? I mean, you deal with this all the time. I just wanted to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually a fantastic question. So there's kind of two parts to that. So the first thing I'll say is that trauma is sticky.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you ever dealt with something sticky like syrup or glue or something like that, it just kind of sticks to everything, and anything you touch, it just kind of sticks to. And so when you experience trauma, the next time you experience trauma, it sticks together.
Yeah.
And it sticks together, and it sticks together. And you have an experience with somebody that may not be traumatic, but maybe they trigger something in you that reminds you of that trauma. And so now that person automatically gets associated with that trauma, even though they had nothing to do with it and actually didn't do anything to harm you.
Yeah.
The brain categorizes them into that trauma. So trauma gets very, very sticky. And if we don't deal with it, if we don't clean off our hands, if we don't deal with that trauma, then it just continues to stick and stick and stick and stick until we completely isolate ourselves away from everybody.
It's huge.
And so what I tell people, I remind them of military battle tactics.
Yeah.
And I said, when you're having anxiety or a panic attack, to me, it feels a lot like an ambush.
Right.
Because out of nowhere, we're getting hit with these thoughts, these feelings. Our heart is racing. We're feeling out of control. We're feeling overwhelmed. That's exactly what an ambush feels like.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And so what does the enemy want to do in an ambush? They want to attack you. They want to surprise you and attack you. They want to separate you from your squad so they can overwhelm you and kill you.
Right.
That's exactly what a panic attack does.
Yeah.
Right? Because it comes out of nowhere and it hits you, and it makes you isolate away from your friends and family, your support network, because you feel embarrassed or ashamed. And so you isolate away from people. And then the intrusive thoughts start coming in, and there's nobody there to support you.
Yeah.
And eventually they overwhelm you, and then you commit suicide.
Right.
So I teach guys that how you deal with a panic attack or with PTSD is exactly like you would an ambush.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you would do? Well, I'd return fire.
Muscle memory. Yeah. Where are we going?
I'd return fire. I said, okay, so when those negative thoughts and experiences, when that comes into your mind, you have to fight that with truth.
Oh,
so what's
powerful.
the truth of the situation? Yes, you feel like this parking lot, like there's somebody here, like you're going to die. You have to remind yourself, like, no, I'm in America. Hey, I'm safe. Hey, this is Safeway. The real odds of me getting hurt here are minimal.
Yeah.
Like, I'm okay. I'm just going to take a minute. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to assess my situation. There's no real threat out here. Everybody's fine. I don't see any weapons in anybody's hands. You have to bring that truth out, that this is the reality of it. Because your brain, your unconscious mind, is throwing off warning signals to your conscious mind, say, hey, we're in danger.
Yeah.
But you have to tell the subconscious, like, no, we're fine. Like, give it the information that it needs to calm down. And so that's part of it. You have to have that cognitive thought process to say, no, I'm okay, and walk yourself through it. We call it a function check.
Yeah.
And so I teach guys in the book how to do a function check. And it's actually part of the app as well, how to talk themselves down from that traumatic PTSD moment, how to talk themselves down. And so just like a weapon, when it's malfunctioning, you go through each of the systems till you found where it's malfunctioning. You repair that piece, and then you get back in the fight. And so I teach guys that same thing. And so that's the first part of it. The first thing you do is return fire. And that's basically how you do it. I go more in depth. But the second part is you would call for support, right?
Yeah.
You'd get on the hook and you'd say, hey,
we're getting shot at.
That's right. I need some air assets
Yep.
Inbound, or I need some cover fire, or,
Yep.
I need another unit to come support me.
Right.
You would get on the phone. I said, so when we're being attacked in combat, would you be embarrassed to pick up that hook and say, hey, I'm getting hit, like I need help?
No.
You wouldn't.
Not even a thought.
Right. So why would you feel ashamed to call one of your buddies when you're dealing with PTSD? Now that
Such
we've
a good
associated
analogy.
it, that it's the same thing,
Yep.
right? The exact same thing is happening. So if you wouldn't be embarrassed to call if you're getting shot at, why would you be embarrassed when you're being bombarded with these intrusive thoughts and suicidal ideations? You wouldn't.
Yeah.
So I try and have them overcome that stigma by using military battle tactics.
Love it.
And so that's one of the main things that I try and do to help
Sure.
guys in the moment
Yeah.
overcome those things. Now, there's a lot more that we go into in depth in the book and
Right.
in the program that gives more steps for guys to do. But that's really the basics of that process right
Gotcha.
there.
So let's dive into Pop Smoke then. This is I got to play with it a little bit and kind of check it out, and the aesthetics are clean. It looks like something I would use in the battlefield. Let's tell me, where did the idea come from? What does the app do? What are the functions?
Yeah, so Operation Pop Smoke, it started as a way for me just to better communicate with the veterans that I'm serving.
Yeah.
Because as we're growing and more guys are coming in, it's harder for me to touch every person and be in direct
Right.
contact with them on a regular basis because we're growing so much.
Yeah.
And so I try and raise up other leaders, but there's still this communication piece that we were missing. And so I was a communication specialist
Nice.
in the military, and then I got stationed with 1st Anglico. And so with communication is key,
Yeah.
to everything. If comms are down, you're combat ineffective.
That's
You're
right.
really stuck. And so what we were dealing with is guys are going through a mental health crisis, but they're not reaching out. And so
Yeah.
I had to find out why. Like,
It's a huge piece. That's almost one of the biggest pieces.
That's right. What is happening? They're getting isolated and they're not calling for help. And I have to figure out why.
Yeah.
And so I started just talking with my guys like, hey, you've been struggling with this for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Why didn't you call me? Oh, I didn't want to bother you.
Yeah,
or I didn't
right,
want this or
right.
that. I didn't want to be a burden. I know you're busy. All these excuses. And we tried using like a Facebook Messenger or like a text message group, but it just wasn't working because
Yeah.
guys weren't
They
reaching
still
out.
weren't reaching out.
They weren't
Yeah.
reaching out. Even though we had that there, we had it set up, they weren't using it. And I had to find out why. And so I started doing a tremendous amount of study on how the brain actually operates. And what I found was more not how the brain operates, but how it fails to operate when people are going through a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So you have two basic parts of the brain. You have your conscious and subconscious, or people call it unconscious, depending on
Right.
what psychologist you're talking
Sure.
to, right? But basically, you have your frontal cortex, which is your good decision making, your long term planning, and your ability to control impulses are all controlled with your frontal cortex. Now, when you're going through a mental health crisis, your capacity to use your frontal cortex is completely reduced.
Yeah.
So it's not that these guys don't want to. They just don't have the facilities to be able to
There's an
reach
actual
out.
reaction going on in the brain, right?
That's right. That part of the brain is shut down.
Yeah.
And so they don't. It's not that they don't want to reach out. They just can't. They don't know how.
Yeah.
And so knowing that, learning that, I went back to my guy and said, well, what if there was just a single button push that you could push and then the signal would go out to us and then we could reach out to you when
Yeah.
it was convenient to us.
Yeah.
I said, oh, that would be great because it takes away the burden,
Yeah.
takes away the shame,
Yeah.
takes away the embarrassment because you just hit a button and then, like, I'm in this meeting right now.
Right.
Maybe I can't get to that right now,
Right,
but I
right,
can
right.
in 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Yep.
Right? And so it alleviates that stress that they feel.
Yeah.
Now, guys, when they're struggling with mental health, they struggle to reach out, like I said. So with this app, when they start to feel uneasy, there's two buttons they can push, the white smoke or the red smoke. So when they're feeling a little uneasy, maybe they woke up just feeling a little off, or they're fighting with the wife, or
Yeah.
they're starting to feel a little bit depressed, they can just push that white button and it sends an alert out to the squad that, hey, I'm mildly struggling with an issue.
Sure.
Now, if they push the red button, that's I'm homicidal, suicidal, about to
Right.
use drugs or alcohol. It's dangerous.
Serious. Yeah.
So they push that button and it sends the same alert out, but it's a red alert, and it also turns on the GPS locator on their phone.
Nice. Yeah.
And so all of these ideas came about by me working with veterans and trying to figure out a way to be able to better communicate. So these were just kind of random ideas that I had floating around in my head. I didn't really have a solid pathway. I had to put this together or what to do. And And I remember I just prayed that night because we'd gotten really close to losing one of our guys. And through phone calls and text messages, we talked to his family and found out that he was inebriated and leaving his parents' house to go to his wife's house walking. And so we literally did a grid-by-grid search of the city. My wife and I are in Mexico trying to coordinate two of my squad leaders on the ground, and they're doing a grid-by-grid search.
Right.
And they find this guy on the freeway overpass contemplating jumping.
Jeez.
And I'm not kidding you. They did a textbook snatch and grab. They rolled up hard on him. One of the guys got out and literally snatched him off and threw him in the rig.
That's the right answer.
And they took him to the VA hospital.
Yeah.
So I said, there's got to be a better way. And so I said, okay, we got to get this GPS feature. That's got to be a part. And so all these different parts were kind of floating around my head. I just remember I just prayed. Like, most times I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to tell you.
Sure.
You know, and I just pray. I said, God, just show me how to make this work.
Yeah.
What do I do? And I woke up the next morning with this vision in my head, and I couldn't get rid of it, and I still can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
And it was all these pieces. And so if you look at our PSA, our public service announcement for the app for Operation Pop Smoke, every element that is in that video is a vision that I had. Now, I didn't see it in video format. It was more like still frames. So every one of those video, portions of video, I saw it already. Like there's little things in it that I didn't realize at the time were important, but I just put it in there. And it wasn't until the project was complete that I kind of sat back and I was like, wow, okay, now I can see it. I couldn't see it. All I saw were the little pieces, but once I was obedient and built out the video in the app the way God had showed me, then I could see the whole picture.
Yeah.
It's kind of like building a puzzle without seeing the box.
Totally.
Once you get it all put together, you're like, oh, that's what it is.
I use that analogy a lot. It's a good one.
So with that, if you look at our PSA, it's a 3-minute PSA. You can find it on YouTube or on our webpage, operationpopsmoke.com. You'll see it. It's a veteran going through his day, dealing with mental health. And so it shows him sleepless night, getting up in the morning, having flashbacks, these little triggers are popping up. All of those things I put into the video. One of the really unique things was that I didn't want any organic sound in the video at all. So all the organic sound has been completely removed. Yep. And every sound is the sound of something in the military. Yeah. So the bus going by is actually a tank. When he flips the switch on the coffee pot, it's the selector switch of an AR-15.
Dang.
When he's grinding the beans, it's actually 7.62 rounds getting pulled out of a ammo box. All these different sounds are organic to military,
and
which is stuff that we see.
So accurate too. I mean, that's what we're trained to hear. Wow.
So how everyday sounds, how they correlate to combat or military for us. And so all of those little things were in there. And then I watched the video for the first time and I was just like, wow, that's it.
That's so huge. That's so huge. One of the things that really caught my attention about the app too, you talked about losing the logic part when you're in a PTSD moment. And that's typically what prompts those suicidal thoughts. And part of your app is that functions check, which forces you to think about what are three things you can hear right now?
Yes.
Touch something. What can you feel? Taste something. What can you taste? It's bringing your senses back to I'm right here, right? Because in that, and I've experienced that where I'm in the U.S., but I really think I'm in Iraq.
Absolutely.
I really think that thing on the side of the road is a bomb.
Yep.
It's real.
Yes.
It's not I kind of thought. No, it's in your mind. It is real. And so how has that impacted the people who have been testing it and stuff like that? I mean, that's got to be just such a huge thing to be able to bring people back.
Yeah, it's really cool. And again, it's nothing that I created. I read a tremendous amount. I read a lot of medical journals. I read a lot of studies on how the brain works and stuff that would just completely bore other people. Sure. I find it fascinating,
Absolutely.
Right? Like how the brain operates and all these different things. And so what you are experiencing is called an amygdala hijack.
Yeah.
So there's a small little primal part of your brain that is your fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
And so that's what happens is your subconscious bombards you with this stimuli saying that you're in danger, and then your amygdala hijacks your brain, and you go to this lower form of thinking. So that's where you can't use your cognitive reasoning skills. So what happens, and I try to explain this to people are like, I don't understand what that means. It doesn't make sense.
Sure.
So I try and tell people, I said, especially here in the Northwest, right? I said,
Sure.
you've driven in traffic before, right?
Yeah.
And so when I do this, I do a lot of speaking engagements.
Sure.
And so I'll have the whole audience there, and I'll say, all right, so let me explain how this works. Show of hands, who here has ever driven in traffic? Everybody raises their hand, right? I said, all right, so who here has ever been frustrated, when somebody's cut them off in traffic?
Sure.
Still, everybody raises their hands.
Right.
I said, okay, now show of hands, when that happens, who's ever wanted to just hit the gas and put that guy into the wall? And like one or two people like put their hand up, and I got my hand up. I said, I look around, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm the only one. I'm the only one that feels like that, right? And the whole room starts laughing because they've all, majority of people have felt that way. Yeah. They just don't want to verbalize that, right?
We don't want to be violent people, but... Yeah.
So what I tell them is, I said, okay, so that experience right there, right? We've all experienced that. But you were able to have your cognitive thought process kick in.
Yeah.
And you had good reasoning skills, long-term planning, and you were able to avoid that situation because your cognitive thought processes kicked in.
That's right.
And you were able to work through that issue and avoid that situation. I said the problem is those faculties aren't available to somebody going through a mental health crisis.
That's huge.
They're
and what
not
a
able
great
to do
analogy too, because that could happen every day.
Yeah,
it does happen every day.
It does. It does. And so the people aren't able to process through that. They aren't able to not act on that impulse. Yeah. And what we know by talking to suicide survivors, and I've watched a lot of interviews with suicide survivors, they've all regretted the attempt. Yeah. The moment that they commit suicide, they regret it. Yeah. Because they acted on that impulse. Yeah. And so with the app, it gives them a way out. Yep. So they don't have to act on that impulse. Yeah. Because it gives them a way out. So there's a fascinating study that was done by Johns Hopkins University, and it was about rats and how they originally wanted to see how rats, which rat could swim better, the domesticated rat or the wild rat. Mm-hmm. And what they did is they put these rats in jars. And this is the 1950s, okay? So you couldn't get away with this now. I'm just going to disclaimer, all right, if you're listening to this and you're a little tenderhearted.
Decades ago.
Yeah. If you're a little tenderhearted, maybe pause this for a minute. But they put these rats in these jars and they let them swim around until they drowned, and they timed them. Right. Well, it only took the rats about 2 minutes before they would nose around the edge, realize there was no escape, and then they would literally dive to the bottom and drown themselves and die. And so the scientists were perplexed. Like, we know they're better swimmers than this. Right. And there's no real change between the domesticated rat or the wild rat. Mm-hmm. So they went back to the drawing board and they thought, what can we do to change the parameters of this and get different results? So that's what they did. They brought in fresh rats and they put them in the jars and they let them swim around. Exact same results. They nosed around the edge. Mm-hmm. After 2 minutes, they dove down. But the moment they started to dive to the bottom, the scientists would rescue the rat out. Mm. They would hold it for a few minutes. Yeah. They would pet the rat, let it recover, and then they would reintroduce it right back into that same jar.
Interesting.
Now, something amazing happened. Those rats would now swim for hours and sometimes even days before their body physically succumbed to exhaustion and they would drown.
Wow.
It was amazing.
It's huge.
Yeah, the scientists were blown away. And so they concluded this, that in the absence of hopelessness, the rats did not die. You see, it was that small injection of hope into the rat's life, that hope of rescue, that kept them fighting harder and longer than anyone ever expected. And it's that same hope that we give the veteran when he pushes that button, that his squad is coming for him, and he's going to fight harder and longer to stay alive.
That's huge. It's absolutely huge. Wow. It's powerful. And I'm obviously, as a vet, my mindset is one a day is too much. Mm-hmm. It's unacceptable. So everything that can be done to reduce that number is huge. And this, I think, makes big leaps and bounds. And it's so interesting to watch the government try. And we don't need to go too deep into this, but I'm very anti-veteran crisis line because it's run by a civilian contractor. Mm-hmm. How does that even make sense? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. And so I have come across other organizations that set up their own little micro call centers. And I always had the idea like, all right, if I'm a vet and I'm dealing with PTSD and I have suicidal thoughts, I'm going to call this hotline. Even if it was a vet on the other line, but they were a Vietnam vet and I was OAF, I was in Iraq, there's still a bridge that can't be gapped there. What if when I called, the answering service asked me, what branch did you serve in and what era did you serve in? So you're connected with not just somebody who served, but somebody who's in the same theater.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about multiple generations here. Like, ideologically, I have disagreements with some people who were in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just because it was a whole different generation, right? They think differently, and that's not a bad thing. But the fact that they can't even bridge the gap of the person behind the phone who's trying to help a veteran who dealt with something very micro-specific, that blows me away. And so I'm super happy to see the people who are outside of that system that are saying, you know what? We don't need that. That really doesn't work. It's not the most efficient thing out there. Let's go build something that is. That's the, by vets, for vets, I think is a really powerful thing. The other thing that I really, really liked about this app is the fact that it wasn't a global thing, right? You don't just sign up for the service and pop red smoke and all of a sudden 100 people are getting your message. That's not how it worked in the military, right? We were in squads in the military, and that was your tight little knit group. And that's how you have the app set up, right?
Absolutely. So I'm glad you transitioned to that because I was going to get ready to. So that's perfect. Exactly. So I read a study. Like I said, I read a lot.
Yeah,
right?
right.
So there's a study that the Department of the Army did. It was a 40-year-long study, and they wanted to find out why the U.S. military was so formidable on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And they literally narrowed this down to one single element, which is the squad.
Holy crap.
Because we fight in squads, and every member of the squad, they value the squad over themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're going to fight harder and longer because they don't want to let the squad down.
That's right.
And that's it. That's why. And we all know that, right? Let's say
Yeah,
no brainer.
right.
We tell veterans that, and
That
they're
makes
like,
sense.
"Oh yeah, of
duh.
course, that makes complete sense, right?"
Right.
Like that's our family, and we would, and knowing that we value the squad over ourselves. But on the other side of that coin is that we know if we get pinned down or we get injured, that squad is going to walk through hell to get us out. 10 guys are going to run headlong into gunfire to pull one guy out because we're never going to leave a guy behind.
That's right.
And so we know that. And so by creating a squad of people that you already know and love and trust, that's how people are going to be able to overcome suicide. Yeah. And it's going to help them heal long term.
Yeah, that's right.
Because there's no accountability for the crisis line or the veteran suicide line or any of these other lines. There's no accountability. People call in. They can be whoever they want to be.
Sure.
They can have whatever problem they want to have.
Yep.
And they don't ever have to change anything in their life.
That's right.
They can just continue to use that as a crutch, and they're never going to get better.
Yeah.
They just get stuck in this cycle.
Yeah.
And so with the app, with your friends and your family and your battle buddies, there's accountability there.
That's right.
Right? And they know you better than anybody. So just like your squad, there's that small group of people who you know and trust, and they're the ones who are going to be able to help get you to that next level of your healing.